Good evening. This is Tonight with Tim Modise. In the program, we talk about the violence in the taxi industry, and later we focus on the prevalence of depression in our communities. Welcome. Recently, 12 people suspected to be taxi drivers were ambushed and killed in a hail of bullets. They were on their way to Joburg from the funeral of a colleague in KwaZulu-Natal. The colleague had been killed in a suspected hit that was blamed on the squabbles about taxi routes. These incidents have drawn focus on the state of affairs in the minibus taxi industry, which include unregulated routes, unsubsidized fares, poor customer service, and poor road safety standards. The industry provides transport to more than 12 million people daily. To discuss this, I'm joined by Mr. Phillip Taaibosch, the President of the South African National Taxi Council. Dr. Taaibosch, pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having SANTACO on your program.
And I did not say too much about the taxi violence. Normally we hear about it as, it's referred to as taxi wars. And the wars never end, Dr. Taaibosch. What is the problem with the taxi industry? I've mentioned some of them and we'll unpack them point by point. But these days you cannot mention the taxi industry, minibus taxi industry, without mentioning violence. It's bad for the reputation of the industry.
It's unfortunate. Let me tell you, this is one of the biggest black businesses in the country. And instead of us talking about how do we ensure that we put the valuables, like for instance the market itself, that we look into, how do we make sure that we begin to grasp with coming with our own commodities. We hear about violence every now and then in the industry. But I must indicate, Tim, that we are not happy as a taxi industry with what is going on. But again, one of the things that would assist us is if we have effective policing in the country, if we have also, and when I'm referring to effective policing, that will lead to the convictions of the perpetrators of violence within the taxi industry and around the taxi industry. And I'm saying around the taxi industry is because sometimes when a violence has taken place next to a taxi rank, it is perpetuated to be a taxi violence.
Let me just stay with this particular incident for a short time, because I'm interested in discussing the overall issues affecting the industry. 12 people killed. They were coming from a funeral of a colleague. Obviously, this was a pre-planned hit, and we, from information that's coming through, it appears that there are people in the industry who are behind this. Over 255 bullets that were found on the scene of the crime, and 12 men being killed all at once is a substantial number. These were people who were active in the industry. These are breadwinners, people with families. Why would such a thing happen within your industry?
Tim, that's a question we are asking ourselves, and we need answers to that question. But also, when you look into these poor drivers, they went to go and bury one of theirs, and on their way back, they are ambushed in that particular fashion. And up to today, I am not sure who to blame, whether I should blame other drivers or I should blame taxi operators. But what we're saying that the time has arrived for the law to be stringent around these issues, and also to go to an extent of making an example. I'm looking at the court sometimes making an example about people who abuse others. And I believe that in the taxi industry, for us to really see that there is enforcement of the law in this country, we need to have an example. For instance, if I, Tim, I am caught in a violent activity whereby it is taxi related, when I'm arrested and I'm found guilty and sentenced, that also my rights, and that rights will be inflicting also to my family, my rights to operate taxi business in South Africa should then be forfeited. I think that will be one of the scaring remedies to say that should I involve myself in violence and deny my children and my family of a better growth.
Sure, and I think it makes absolute sense. Many people would agree with you, the lawmakers. I hope they're watching, or at least they get to hear this from you, that you recommend that whoever is found to be involved in violent acts or activities within the industry must then be banished from taking part in the industry. Let's talk about the bigger, broader issues that lead to the tensions within the industry, besides the attitudes of the people. Can you mention a few? I've spoken about unregulated routes. It appears there are big men within the industry who decide who gets which route and so on. I'm not sure about the government's role in that regard, that there are no subsidies, but you tell me more.
Tim, let me say that you know, at a particular time around 1996 up to 1998, we came out with methodologies of how do we ensure that the taxi industry is operated in a government way. And we began with, and we agreed, and hence I brought you a document called the NTTT, the National Taxi Task Team document, so that you go through, browse through that particular document. You would see that there were plans put forward to say that how do we emerge from the past violent history of the taxi industry into a new environment with a new government coming into place. And we started by registering taxi associations. And we even agreed with government in that particular NTTT document to say that how do we ensure that we don't have an association which is born overnight. And we said all associations which were born before the 1st of October 1994, those associations and those associations being also recommended by the other association they are working with in, you know, the other one has a point A and a point B, and they are recognizing each other, and those routes where those associations will be operating will be regarded as registered routes of those associations. For me, I could see a lot of improvement, and I could see a lot of understanding from taxi operators. Hence, when we amalgamated all taxi associations into South Africa in the year 2000, where SANTACO was then born as the authentic representative body of the taxi industry, we believe that we have crossed that a breach of violence in the taxi industry. And I'm sure if you go to a little bit to the history, you would say you'd see that we have moved from the violent past gradually, and there was a time when violence was completely something which we could not talk about in the industry.
Let me just explore a few issues with you. How many members do you have?
We have approximately 186,000 members.
These would be taxi operators?
This would be taxi
And how many people are employed in the industry, drivers specifically?
If I'm referring to drivers, I'm talking about close to 480,000 people.
And so overall there are 500,000 plus people who participate in the taxi industry.
It could be more, Tim, because remember that the other people we are not counting is the people who are washing cars in the taxi rank.
The queue marshals.
It is the queue marshals. It is even the hawkers who are selling in the taxi rank.
I'm excluding those. I'm talking about the ones who've got a direct interest in this.
Let's talk about the queue marshals and the drivers who've got a direct bearing on the taxi industry. We're talking about close to 750,000 people.
That's a substantial number of people.
Yeah.
Are you receiving any subsidies?
Tim, I'm not sure how to respond to that question, because I thought that subsidies were for a particular group of people prior to 1994, and I'm surprised that I'm continuing to see it as being practiced in the country, that subsidies are for those who have, and those who are doing actually the services which was supposed to be done by government are continuously being denied the right to subsidies.
So you don't receive subsidy.
Any kind of subsidy from government.
How many people do you transport a day?
We are transporting 15.6 million people per day.
All right, so I gave a very conservative number at the top, said 12 million, so it's
15.6 million people.
This is where I'm coming from with this view, Mr. Taaibosch. 750,000 people involved in the industry in an active way of providing the means of transport. 15.7 million people using the taxi industry daily, and there are no subsidies. Now, I disagree with the whole violent way of resolving differences within the industry, but somewhere, obviously, the government, if it were to provide subsidies, this is just a thought, would have had influence on how the taxis operate, isn't it? I mean, the quality of the vehicles, the safety quality of the vehicles, the age of the vehicles, the routes that are allocated, a whole number of things. If you are a player, if you pay the piper to some extent, you can and will be able to call the tune.
Tim, let me also appreciate what government has done, even if it was not that effective. I think one has to appreciate that with the introduction of the tax recapitalization program. It has assisted, I'm sure you have seen how, and I'm trying to answer to your question, you have seen how taxi operators were able to purchase new vehicles, taking out the so-called dead coffins, as were said by the former president of the country, Mr. Thabo Mbeki. But the question you ask yourself is, what could be the results of a complete subsidy in the taxi industry? It would bring a lot of changes. It will bring a situation whereby the employees, even the car washers and the queue marshals, are permanently employed. It could also bring a situation where we could be having, instead of having police, we could be having peacekeepers in the industry who are employed on a 24-hour service to ensure that each and every taxi that gets into the taxi rank is a properly registered taxi.
Absolutely.
With not only registered with the authorities, but registered with the taxi authority also, like the association, the region where that association operates from. So we would have a situation where adherence to discipline would be the order of the day.
That's precisely the point. I agree with you. And I think we need to explore this subject further, right? It's because of the interests of the taxi operators themselves, right? The financing mechanisms when they buy the vehicles, I've heard that there are problems there. The working conditions of the taxi drivers, the safety of the commuters, and the fact that whenever there are fuel increases, for instance, they get passed on to the commuters and that they do not receive subsidies. And I'm talking about subsidies because the trains, they receive subsidies, the buses, they continue to receive subsidies, and taxis not. And of course, the violence itself has got to stop. Mr. Taaibosch, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much, Tim.
And that's the president of SANTACO, Mr. Phillip Taaibosch, who is talking to us here. He's handed me the Constitution. Who would have thought, because many people may not think that you have these things, that SANTACO does have a Constitution. So I've got one, and I will be going through it later on. When we return, we'll look at the pervasive mental health issues that affect many families around the country.